Virtual board meeting, not quite in public. It's being recorded, and you will be able to, the public will be able to look at the video unedited on our website. And hopefully going on in the future, we'll look at streaming, etc. Without further ado, a couple of things. Apologies for absence. I think Shawana is on leave. Yep, so Shawana, one of our GPs, on leave. And Stephen King has emailed this morning. He's going to be a little bit late, so he won't be with us until 10 o'clock. I haven't heard anybody else. Okay, before I start the meeting proper, I just thought it may be right, although people know that we sadly lost Terry Patmore, our Essex County Council representative. And I think we ought to have just a moment's silence for him, and perhaps also to remember other people who have lost both within the NHS and social care sector and beyond, but particularly Terry for us. So just a few moments. Okay, thank you everyone. So sadly missed, and yeah, it makes it real, doesn't it? So we'll come to Paul shortly, but for Paul's benefit, and maybe for the public who are going to watch this later on, perhaps we ought to introduce ourselves. So I've thought long and hard about this, and I'm going to do a roll call like we're at school. So I'll go down the list. So Bobby, are you there, Bobby?
I'm here. I'm Bobby Graham. I'm the lay member for public and patient involvement.
Thanks, Bobby. Tony.
Hi, I'm here. Tony Coles, Director of Transformation.
Thanks, Tony. David.
David McConnell, lay member, primary care.
And Christine.
Christine Moss, Chief Medical Officer for the CCG.
And Maggie, you're there, yeah. Are you there, Maggie? Actually, Maggie's on the screen, but she's not muted or otherwise. Oh no, she's on twice.
Rob, she sent a message saying that she couldn't get sound, so she's dialed in.
Okay, yeah. All right, we need to watch that one because she's on twice. That sometimes leads to issues. We have Ian. Are you there, Ian? Ian Perry there? Okay, Ian's not there. John.
Morning. Yes, John Leslie, Interim Director of Finance, Contracting and Performance.
Thanks, John. Ian, you're here.
Yeah, Ian Tompkins, Director Corporate Services.
Jen, are you there, Jen?
I'm here. Jen West, GP board member and GP in North Ethelsturt.
Thanks, Jen. Angus.
Yeah, hi, good morning. Also GP in Clinical Vice Chair.
Excellent. Peter. That's Peter. Peter.
Yeah. There was a bit of a race there. So,
yeah,
Peter Boylan, Special Advisor to the Board on Clinical Quality.
Thanks, Peter. Jane.
Director of Nursing and Quality.
And Amik.
Hi there, GP Clinical Lead for Urgent Care, GP in Harlow.
Thanks, Amik. Simone.
Good morning, Head of Legal and Governance and Company Secretary for CCG.
Okay, and Peter Whiteman.
Hi, morning. It's Peter Whiteman, Director of Primary Care and Localities.
Duncan. Morning, Duncan.
Forsyth, consultant geriatrician and secondary care advisor.
James.
Director.
James. Sharon, tell us, yeah. Introduce yourself.
Sharon Church for the minutes.
And Vanessa.
Vanessa Moon, Head of Communications and Engagement.
Okay, and Ian, you're on. Ian Perry.
Ian Perry, GP, Waltham Abbey.
Excellent. With children. Excellent. Good. Well, thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
That takes me back to, oh no, I wasn't at public school. Okay. Good. Right. Declarations of interest. We always have that top of the list. Any declaration of interest on anything in particular on the agenda? I've not really spotted anything, but okay, thank you. And Bobby and Ray. So Bobby, would you like to introduce our patient story, and Ray can introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to introduce our patient story this week, Ray Woodcock. Ray is a long-serving attendee at all our public board meetings, so it gives me great pleasure to introduce him. He's going to provide some positive feedback on recent and previous experience with the NHS. Over to you, Ray.
Thank you, Bobby, and good morning to you all. Can you hear and see me?
And indeed, Ray, in glorious Technicolor.
Excellent. Firstly, one of the board members, Terry Cutmore, over many years, he has really helped me in so many ways. I was very, very saddened to hear of his passing. My best wishes go to his family. Bobby, when I first spoke to you at the last, I think it was the last board meeting, I said that I said that I would like to give you my story, but my family situation has developed a little bit. So I'd like to talk about not only me and my experiences with the NHS, but also my wife, Doreen. My story starts on Tuesday, the 8th of October of last year, when I experienced chest pains following an important meeting, which, with a positive result, would have helped many thousands of people in my area. I visited Stansted surgery at about an hour after the chest pain started, and the receptionist told me to wait a few moments and that a medic would see me immediately. A nurse called me within minutes. She took my blood pressure and ECG, and I heard her whisper, your blood pressure is very high. It's over 220 systolic. I was asked to return to the waiting area and would be called to see a doctor within a minute or so. I was called by Dr. Barter. He confirmed my blood pressure was over 200 and did a number of other tests. He also asked me to describe what led to this situation. Cutting the long story short, I told him that I think the cause was stress-related following a meeting I attended that morning, which included Essex Health and Wellbeing representatives and my parish council concerning a license for another dispensing pharmacy in our town. He was aware of this issue, and during the meeting, I established that I had been excluded from receiving key information. I was very disturbed about that. Dr. Barter talked this through with me. He gave me a letter and told me to go to Princess Alexandra Hospital, accident and emergency, immediately. He also advised that I should seriously consider changing my lifestyle. For an individual like me, as many of you appreciate, that's not easy. I arrived at A&E at 7 o'clock with my wife and was told by the receptionist that they were abnormally very busy. I was flagged as an urgent patient, and after an acceptable waiting time, I saw a nurse who did an ECG and blood pressure test and took many samples of my blood. My blood pressure was still high. After some hours, this isn't a complaint. I wanted to record, and I do want to record all the facts, and following the nurse in charge announcing to those waiting in A&E that they were very busy, resulting in long waiting times. About 30% of those waiting left immediately. Shortly after I was called for further examinations, you would have heard at the board meetings very frequently that this is quite a regular occurrence at Harlow Hospital A&E, and I can confirm that actually happened when I was there. A doctor repeated the ECG and blood pressure tests and ordered an X-ray. After a short wait, I saw another nurse who started a long time ECG and took more blood for further tests. This nurse was monitoring me continuously. She passed me to another doctor who asked many questions, including the level of chest pain. He ordered a CT scan. With all this information that had been gathered on my condition, I told the doctor the build-up of my chest pain. He agreed that stress is likely to have been the cause and suggested, as did Dr. Barter, that I consider my lifestyle. I'm very involved in many local issues, such as flooding, air quality, highways, and campaigning for an NHS dispensing licence. I was also involved in the static surgery campaign, which many of you experience my constant nagging. I know that must reduce my. I now know that I must reduce my voluntary workload, but for someone like me, that's difficult. I saw Dr. Barter on the 9th of October, a day following my long session at A&E. By the way, when I arrived at 7 o'clock in the evening, I left at 6 o'clock the following morning. Again, not a complaint, it just demonstrates the thoroughness of all the examinations and tests that were being done on me. The NHS continued to explore my condition, and on the 14th of October, I attended the cardiology chest pain clinic, which resulted in an appointment for an angiogram procedure on the 18th of November. What actually surprised me, it amazed me, and this is something, board members, you rarely mention, the cost of this equipment, the angiogram equipment. It must have been staffed by something like 8 people, all professionals. The equipment, it was out of this world. It's space age stuff. And if there is a learning process, it's not only the people, it's the equipment that you use to help identify conditions like mine. The whole experience has left its mark. The equipment the NHS used to establish what was or not wrong with me was a shock. The cost of CT scan and angiogram equipment must be massive, and the skills and the number of professionals using the equipment was considerable surprise. They were doing so much just for me. But my need for help of the NHS has not stopped there. My wife had breathing difficulties at the end of March of this year. It was a Sunday, and we called NHS 111 for help. We spoke to the phone contact, who asked many questions, many probing questions, which concluded that the doctor's advice was needed. A doctor called us within 60 minutes and again asked very probing questions. This doctor concluded that my wife needed to see a doctor and arrange an appointment with the Lister Medical Help Centre in Harlow. A GP examined my wife and told her to see her GP the following day, Monday the 30th of March. That afternoon, she was examined by her standard surgery GP, who told her to go to A&E at Harlow Hospital that evening. Again, we carried a letter from our GP. She had numerous tests, and remember, this is all at the time that the virus issue was developing. Harlow Hospital that evening. Again, we carried a letter from our GP. She had numerous tests, including CT scan, after being admitted. She was in hospital for 2 nights in complete isolation. And I really, some of the stories she described, it was worse than the prison. But that, again, is not a complaint. This is reality. Yes, she had a coronavirus test, which fortunately proved negative. She has been diagnosed with COPD, but more tests are still needed. Our experience with the NHS, much of which you have put in place, we have used, and I've tried to describe it. You have discussed at board meetings in public that Harlow Hospital A&E is frequently used by people who go to it because it is more convenient for them to do so than just visit their GP. I'm confirming this does happen. I saw it when I was waiting in A&E last October, when the nurse in charge announced that the waiting time was of quite a number of hours. And as I've said, about 30% of those waiting just left immediately. I would like to thank you all for what you have helped put in place just for us. I hope I can justify your efforts by fighting for an additional dispensing pharmacy in my town. Please pass our thanks to all of your colleagues in Stansted Surgery, the Lister Medical Centre in Harlow, and Princess Alexandra Hospital. They did so much for us. That is my story, and thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Ray. As usual, it's important for us to hear real stories, real life reality, and as you put it, it just brings to life all that what we do has an impact. So yeah, once again, thanks very much, Ray. Okay. And you're welcome to carry on watching, or you can put your feet up and watch it on as a recording. Okay.
Chairman, goodbye.
Thanks, Ray. Okay, so if we just go on to the minutes of the meeting that we held on the 26th of March, if there's any accuracy issues, anybody spots anything? Otherwise, we'll move on to the.
Rob, just a minor point. The minutes don't reflect that this was actually a virtual meeting, and I don't know whether we need to say that, because we certainly were not all in the boardroom on the 21st of May, on the 26th of March.
So we could record that it's the meeting was held by video conference.
Yes, yeah, I think it just from an accuracy point of view.
Yeah, no, you're right. So yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, there were more people in the room, but yeah, we probably just need to report. Yeah, thanks, Peter. We'll do that. Okay. And if we just go on to the action log, I think most of the actions have been dealt with. Okay, if we just go down, Jane, that was the staffing levels on kit ward had been highlighted.
Yeah, so I think it was about the level of registered nursing staff, but the response back from Staff Ray from EPOT was really that the skill mix reflected the profile of the patients, and actually the need was probably for more for care. But also just to flag, we now only have 2 patients on that ward. So I don't think there isn't an ongoing issue with the staffing.
Okay, thanks, Jane. John, David had mentioned the well, will look like an input error, yeah?
Yes, that's correct. It was an input error and has subsequently been corrected.
Okay, that's fine. Simon.
Yeah, with regard to an update to the Constitution, so the board received a paper in March confirming the board's recommendation that we don't approach members over changes to the Constitution due to, quite frankly, the amount that they were handling at the time. I've been in contact repeatedly with NHS England over the past couple of months, and where we are currently is we've reached preliminary agreement that changes to the Constitution would be made through board approval and NHS England approval, with this being updated at the next public board meeting. But I'm still just addressing a couple of small points before the final position is reached.
Thanks, Simon. Okay, Andrew and I were going to invite Paul, which we've done, so that's our bit done, so that's good. We'll hear from Paul shortly. Jane, LD, quality safety.
Again, it was, I think I was asked a question about whether we had sight of concerns raised by families in respect of patient placements, because we know there's been some evidence of poor care in some of the placements. So I linked in with Phil Brown, who's the commissioning lead for the whole of Essex, and also with our complaints and PALS team. So it's really just a feedback that we have got regular oversight of all patients in placements. We haven't received any concerns or letters of complaints, and we haven't had any SIs related to this cohort of patients. So trying to keep really close oversight, and also probably in the main part of the quality report, working with Phil Brown also through this period of COVID, that we have sight of people and what is happening to this vulnerable cohort of individuals.
David, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's good to see, after a truly terrible Corston Park CQC report, that we're moving our one resident there down to Colchester. So thanks for that.
Okay, thanks, Jane. And actually, Stephen, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself, Stephen? Because we have Paul Burstow on the call.
Hi, yes, apologies for being late. I hope you got my apologies. I'm Stephen King. I am lay member for governance and chair the audit committee.
Okay, and you'll be pleased to know that we're making use of your etiquette and board how to work in the virtual world. So thank you for that, Stephen. And also, Maggie, you're now on, but you're on a phone call. Are you there? Can you hear us? And do you want to introduce yourself? She's there.
So if Maggie sends, if she wants to raise a question, it's probably best just to email Sharon.
Okay, so if you can hear us, Maggie, but you can't speak, yeah, you'll need to do it through an email or chat if you've got that. Are you on mute?
There's a chat message there from Maggie. Check. She's taken us off mute.
It's taken off mute, but it says she's on mute.
It is.
Oh well, there you go. Real world of virtual. Something is not quite right. It's saying you're muted on your telephone. It may be because you're logged in twice, possibly. Anyway, you can hear us, and if you need to contact us, then maybe a text. Okay, so Paul, Maggie is our public health consultant representative from County Council, important part of our board. So if people are happy, we're approving those minutes from the last meeting. Yep. Thank you. Okay, Paul, over to you. Can we hear you?
I hope so. Good morning, Rob. Can you hear me?
We can, loud and clear.
I can see some nods, which is great. Well, good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be joining you. It would have been even more lovely to have joined you in person. But thank you very much for this opportunity to take part in your board meeting. I feel I'd start by just saying thank you, actually. There are plenty of people that all of you and I need to be thanking, but I think it's appropriate to say thank you to you as a group as well. Not just for the roles you're doing beyond being board members, but also for the continuance of the roles that you fulfill as members of this board and the work that you've been doing beyond it to continue to support our population. So I just wanted to start by saying that. Rob has asked me to say a bit about some reflections really on the journey so far. And that sort of gives me quite a bit of latitude to sort of cover a number of things. So what I was going to do, if it's okay, I'm going to now really be brave and try and use the technology to share my screen and put up some slides. Apologies, it's not too many slides, but it just sort of helps me structure what I want to say, and I hope the slides will be available to be seen afterwards. So let me see if this works. Yeah, there we go. Can you actually see those slides?
Not yet, Paul.
There's
okay, right. In that case,
delay usually.
Yeah, let me. Can you see them now?
Yeah, they're coming through.
They're coming through. Yeah, that's it.
Perfect. Okay, good. In which case, let me just get back to the beginning and start there. Thank you very much. So yes, so Rob asked me to sort of talk a bit about the journey so far, and in a way I think it almost feels a bit incongruous doing that, because this has been a journey which now is in two rather different parts, and I'm going to say a bit more obviously as I progress through this about COVID and the impacts that's had and the implications I think that will have for the way in which we develop as an integrated care system, and more importantly, the way in which we respond to the not just present needs of our population, but the undoubted changed circumstances and needs of the population going forward. So first, I just wanted to say a little bit about sort of progress. When I arrived at the tail end of 2018, really kicking off in January 2019, the first thing I tried to do was get out and listen to as many different colleagues across West Essex and Hertfordshire, really to sort of get a sense of what the issues were. And I think there was sort of, I can sum it up really in three ways. One, I think a sort of sense of frustration about the perceived slow progress that had been made until that point. I think a sort of sense of, I think the word that was used several times on a number of my conversations was of Groundhog Day, that colleagues have been round the circuit of moving towards a more system-based way of working and place-based way of working, but it had stalled for various reasons. So that sense of Groundhog Day. And then another common theme that people would say to me was that we seem to have so many priorities, nothing is a priority. And that sort of sense that there were lots of work streams, but not necessarily all of those work streams translating into any patient benefit. So those were sort of some of the things that were coming back to me at that point. And then, of course, in January of 2019, NHS England published the NHS long-term plan to deliver against the funding commitments the government have made to the NHS, set out the sort of ambitions around service development and the way in which the NHS would organise itself to better manage population health and work in partnership with the local government and particularly the community and voluntary sectors. And a year on, we have developed a long-term plan as a system. We've submitted that to NHS England at our regional level and national level. That's all been signed off. And of course, we've had a fairly major disruption to that sort of progress. But in January of this year, we then had the NHS operational planning guidance. Now, I know that's been suspended during the crisis. But one of the things I would just reason for putting it up really was that both these documents still remain very clearly in NHS England's mind as the sort of guiding star, the direction of travel for the service and for the way in which we organise ourselves going forward. And the expectation is that in due course there will be legislation to consolidate a number of the changes that are being talked about in these documents. And I guess that direction of travel is sort of summed up by this slide, that the direction of travel is towards integrated care systems. Some of this audience knows only too well, but I'm also conscious that as this will, I'm sure, be avidly viewed by the population of West Essex, it's worth just repeating that integrated care systems are seen as a way of bringing together all of the different players in health care and public health to better serve the needs of our population. And the national part of the system does see integrated care systems as being central to the delivery of the long-term plan. And these two sort of core roles being at the heart of what an integrated care system is expected to do, both system transformation and the management of system performance. That guidance also set out sort of 6 building blocks, which I'm not going to go through in great detail. They will be things that you would have read when you looked at the guidance earlier in the year. But I just wanted to sort of pick up 2, I think, which are sort of the features of what the government and NHS England have described as system by default. One is the top left-hand box, which talks about system-wide governance. I'm going to say a little bit more about that towards the end of what I wanted to say, but very much the idea of establishing a partnership board, but trying to make sure that we have governance that is both fit for purpose but not burdensome in the way in which it operates. And I think there's a lot of lessons that we can be drawing from the way in which all of the partner organisations in our system have adapted their governance during the current pandemic, and make sure that we learn the lessons from that. And then the leadership model. And the leadership model has 2 sort of key elements. One is an independent chair, and the other is to have an executive lead. And obviously from the 1st of June, Jane Halpin will be taking up that role alongside her role as the accountable officer for the 3 CCGs. And I think these messages, these 6 building blocks, are very much things that have been reinforced in very recent communications by Simon Stevens and by Amanda Pritchard in their communications about expectations as we begin to move into the next few phases of COVID. We were asked, as a consequence of being part of an accelerator program back in the summer and autumn of last year, to put in an expression of interest as a system to become recognised as an integrated care system. And only in February, and that feels like a lifetime ago, I think now, we collectively agreed to put in an expression of interest along with these 8 priorities that we were signalling we wanted to work on over the following sort of 6 to 12 months. Now, obviously, some of these things will either have fallen by the wayside or will have to be revisited and adapted to reflect our changed circumstances. But I would just highlight 3, which I think are still incredibly relevant to where we are now. One is the setting a shared ambition and roadmap for investment in accelerating our digital transformation. Well, we've certainly accelerated our digital transformation. This meeting itself is testimony to that. But we now need to actually make sure that we consolidate those aspects of our virtual care, whether it's in primary care, community or secondary care, that have worked well both from a clinical point of view, but also from the point of view of patient benefit. So I think there's a lot of work to review what has happened there. And the other I would just flag is co-producing a compact with our community and voluntary sector partners, who have been absolutely critical to the way in which we've responded to COVID, and critical to supporting the shielded populations and those populations that are particularly isolated and vulnerable. And I think that is an essential component in what goes forward, and just making sure that our voluntary sector survives the shortages of funding that it's currently experiencing is a critical thing we need to keep in our minds. And the last one on this slide I just wanted to highlight was the anchor symbol. And that's really about recognizing that we as NHS organizations are often the biggest employers in the communities we serve. We have huge impacts through our supply chains, through our environmental impacts and so on. And we need to think about how we use those impacts in a beneficial way to address health inequalities and also to help with the wider recovery of our economy. And of course, all of that to some extent has been disrupted by COVID-19. And I think it's worth just saying that the scale and severity of this really does rule out a complete return to things as they were. And I don't think there's going to be any single moment when the risks that COVID poses will be fully eliminated. It's going to be a non-linear, constantly changing environment. And I think it's worth also saying that we've all been in the same storm when it comes to COVID, but we haven't all been in the same boat. We haven't all experienced it the same way. And indeed, health inequalities have been seen to be widened by the way in which the pandemic has hit our population. And that, again, will have a long legacy that we have to think about in terms of our health response going forward. This slide just very quickly tries to repeat that message. It looks at the sort of some, but not all, of the waves and impacts of the pandemic. Talk increasingly that there is a likelihood, indeed almost all pandemics have a second wave. Quite what the scale of that second wave will be is very much in our own hands in terms of how we are able to implement things like track and trace. But I wanted to highlight the fourth wave that's on this chart, which is the sort of psychological, psychosocial impacts, which again, we know from past pandemics have a longer tail, kick in within the first 12 to 18 months and can be from mild to very severe in terms of post-traumatic stress and so on. And I think there is something for me about how we make sure that we keep that very much in the forefront of our thinking in our work with other partners, because it's not just a healthcare response that's going to be essential to meeting that challenge. This just summarizes that point a bit further. It looks at some of the mental health impacts of COVID across the life course. It's absolutely trying to take a population health approach to thinking about these issues. I think we all need to be sort of digesting this and thinking about what our response will be. But I think part of that response, and I don't take credit for the graphic, is we need a whole society response to these issues. And I think the place-based working through the West Essex ICP, the leadership that you give as a group, will be absolutely critical to that way of working that we will need to have to be successful at responding to some of these challenges as anchor institutions. So when it comes to COVID, NHS England and NHS Improvement have told us there are 4 phases of recovery. I don't think recovery is a particularly good word to describe what we are likely to be going through. I think it's a much more complicated thing than the word recovery suggests. But this just sort of sets out that we're sort of now in the beginnings of thinking about and planning for phase 3, which is the sort of ongoing management of COVID, but also reopening fully the NHS for business. And of course, in practice, the NHS has been open for business, but we know there have been dramatic changes in demand because of the outbreak. And a lot of work has been going on in your system in West Essex, and we're very grateful for all the work that the team has done to help pull together the data that NHS England nationally and regionally has been asking for. I fear that there will be more such requests going forward. And just earlier this week, we had a meeting of chairs and chief executives for the whole of the system, and we were discussing our sort of understanding of the new future that, in a way, COVID has now triggered for us. I'm not going to rehearse all the things on this slide, but clearly they are issues that will be very familiar to you. I would pick up just maybe 2 or 3. One is consolidating the new normal. There have been a lot of cultural, behavioural and operational changes as a result of the way in which we've faced into the pandemic, the way in which our acutes have worked with our community services, worked with primary care. We need to sort of make sure we consolidate those ways of working and behaviours that have been helpful and discard those that have not. We have to contribute to the wider recovery. And And because we have made a significant number of changes to the way in which we deliver healthcare, in terms of virtual healthcare delivery, there is something about how we communicate and gain consent in the longer run for those changes that we want to keep in the system. So what kind of recovery? I put this up really because I think we all, as system leaders, have a role to play in managing and setting expectations. And sometimes we get a bit ahead of ourselves, or some do, in the way in which we talk about the pandemic and create the expectation that this is just a straightforward, clear journey that we're on to a point when it will all be over. Whereas the reality is possibly a bit more like a game of snakes and ladders, and there will be points where things will seem to be reversing. And we just need to bear that in mind, talk about it in ways that recognize just what that means for the way in which people feel about their experience of this pandemic, not least the economic shocks that will follow. I said I would end just very briefly with two final things. One is just to say something about governance. And Rob and Andrew and others will be aware that earlier this week we had a discussion at the joint meeting of chairs and CEOs about some proposals I put forward, which will be subject to consultation with all partner organisations, about establishing a partnership board for our system, and also in order to make sure that we have all the voices and perspectives engaged in the work as well, that we establish an assembly, rather like the assembly that you've established as part of your ICP. And those proposals, I've tried to sort of draw a picture of what that looks like, and I think this now looks a bit too busy and may need to be reviewed further, but this tries to reflect the relationship between the three place-based ICPs, the way in which we might do more specialist mental health and learning disabilities, and the role of the integrated care system itself. I think the key thing I would say here is that the Assembly has the role of supervising, advising, and approving things, and will represent all of the interests geographically and sectorally that need to be reflected in our system. The board have a day-to-day leadership role within our system and hold that relationship with our region and our regulators going forward. Very happy to come back on that. And then finally, Rob, just one final slide. I thought I'd put this up. I saw this presented by another integrated care system chair before the outbreak took place. And it just tries to sort of reflect, if you like, the sort of siloed nature of the system we went into COVID with. And I think actually what this points to is if potentially the sort of less siloed, more upstream system that we need to have going forward with that population lens. Certainly, I think that's what the ambition of the long-term plan is all about, that shift from secondary into community, primary and social, and more self-care as well. But I just thought I'd put that up because I think that's the opportunity that we can take from a very grim set of experiences over the last 2 to 3 months. Rob just asked me to say something about next steps. And I just would sort of say that clearly we've got a lot of work to do at reviewing everything that's happened in the last few weeks, what we're going to keep, what we're going to discard, what we're going to adapt. And I think in a sense, a focus on assuring our critical delivery, both of COVID and non-COVID services, learning the lessons from our response to the pandemic, making sure that we're describing the health challenges facing our population and how we're going to respond to those, and really assuring that assessing the plans we wrote before the outbreak, are they still fit for purpose? Clearly they won't be completely. We will have to adapt them as well. With that, Rob, I will shut up, but I just thought I would just sort of set out those things. Again, I would say thank you all very much for your contributions, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was really helpful, really clear. So guys, what do you got, any comments to make? We've got Paul here. Any questions? Anything for him to take away? Anybody?
Can I ask a question, Rob?
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Paul, for that presentation. One question I had around the role of the anchor institutions, particularly us, the reflection really as us as a CCG and a commissioning organisation, about what we should be doing to identify best practice that we can do as commissioners.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think you were at the Essex Health and Wellbeing Board a couple of meetings ago when Basildon presented on some of their work, and one of the things they were doing, and I think a commissioner can do as well, was actually mapping where their own staff live, and getting a sense of their staff's situation in terms of their own lived experience of deprivation and so on, and the communities in which they're living. So I think there's something of that sort that is part of this. I think that there is actually a role that you as commissioners can be doing in the conversations you have with those you commission, in just seeking assurance that they are seeing this as part of the day job. And certainly Basildon clearly does, and I think it would be good if PAH did, and I certainly know from talking to Lance, I think he does see that as being an essential part of his trust role, and I think it's critical that EPUD does as well. And then there's the conversations with your primary care partners. You know, in terms of sitting in communities, whether it's in Harlow or elsewhere, you know, I think there's an awful lot of intelligence that can be gathered about those wider impacts that have been felt and will continue to be felt in communities. So I think in that sense, CCGs have a role to play as anchor institutions just as much as a hospital does.
Yeah, I wonder whether it might be worth, thank you, Rob, having some time in the board development session considering this, or alternatives.
I agree, that would be useful. So yeah, we will set that up. Sharon, can we just turn the chat on? Or can I see the chat? Because Maggie and Jen came in with a couple of comments or questions. If we can just go up. Okay, Maggie said, yeah, come down. Okay, stop there. Great recognition of economic. So Maggie has just, because we can't hear Maggie, great recognition of economic impact and our role as anchors, and also the psychosocial impact that is going to take time to recover. Yeah. Okay, Jen has asked whether we can share the presentation, I think. Can we just go down a little bit more? Yeah, so we can, yes, that will come out, guys, yeah. Anybody else? Any other observations or comments?
So Stephen?
Okay, and Steve and then Peter Whiteman, yeah.
So I think my observation with my sort of governance hat on is it will be great to see that sort of system governance slide developed a little bit more, and see how we both take the strategy that we've already agreed, modify it, and then sort of hold the system to account for delivery of it. And I think, you know, it would be really helpful to see that and engage, Paul, with you and the system leaders so that we deliver that. And certainly the other three lay members for governance will be, I'm sure, happy to support that, so we get something which is clear. And then the second thing, reminding you of my other hat, which is chair of the Stroke Association, and we're under contract in a number of different areas of the NHS to deliver services. And I think answering Angus's issue, the one thing for the voluntary sector partners is, you know, people's voluntary sector income has just completely dried up, and therefore this CCG has been doing, and I know most CCGs have, but just keeping the sort of the cash flowing is, you know, more impactful than people can really understand, and just that administrative process is really you know, keeping the wider system alive at the moment. So thank you everybody in the back office that's making that happen.
Thanks, Stephen.
I'll just respond to those points, Rob, first, and then come back to Peter. So just to say, in terms of the elaboration on that graphic, and it's this was its first outing, I have to say. But there is a letter, quite a detailed letter, and a draft terms of reference, which I circulated to chairs and chief executives earlier this week. It builds on the work that was being done prior to the outbreak by the sort of system architecture group, but it moves it on, because one of the things that I heard from chairs and chief executives were two arguably undeliverable things in one form, which one was everyone wanted to be in the room, but everyone wanted a small meeting so the decisions could be made. And the way to square that circle is to have a wider, more representative assembly that does have oversight, but at the same time a smaller board that can get on with a lot more of the day-to-day stuff as a unitary board. There are, I think, details of how you make that work. They're set out in the terms of reference. There's more to be added to it. Really welcome feedback on that. And I think your point about the voluntary sector, I mean, vital social scaffolding. And unless we make sure that that social scaffolding is properly supported going forward, you know, as we move back out into a sort of post-COVID world, at some point, we may find that we're missing even more of that vital social infrastructure than we have lost already.
Thanks, Paul. Peter.
Hi, thank you, Paul. I just wanted to draw a bit of attention to our relationship with Essex County Council and how important that is for us. And those of us who have been working on the care homes agenda, it's been a very challenging environment in COVID-19, and that partnership with Essex has been critical in terms of us trying to get on top of what is a very demanding environment. And also as a Borders CCG and Borders hospital, the ICS, I think, provides a really exciting opportunity for PAH to finally get a coherent approach to discharge and pathways and flow. So I just wanted to draw that out. I think that's a particular benefit and opportunity the ICS presents, that's because there's often long-standing arguments around quite how we address this Borders issue. So I just want to draw a bit of attention to it. I wonder if you had any thoughts on it and the opportunities that presents for us getting a coherent approach for our patients coming in and out of PAH and working as an ICS across that border.
So I think one of the things that's been striking with the outbreak is just the sheer scale of the mutual aid and support that's been provided at both a human level, but also in a practical level. Across our system, and indeed out of our system and into the rest of Essex over the last 8 to 9 weeks. I think that the opportunity now is to make sure that some of the very rapid innovation, for example, at PAH around virtual healthcare, and I've just point to the fact that, I mean, I think at one point they were running almost 90% of their outpatient services as virtual appointments. I think their expectation is that might go back to 60% as the new normal. That's why my point about consent is so critical, I think, in explaining why that might happen. But there's learning from that, which we need to make sure is shared across the system, so that we don't sort of go back to where we were. Curiously, the long-term plan envisaged those sorts of levels of virtual healthcare in 5 years' time. And I think the sort of rate of progress is huge. I think the thing I would just mention, in slightly building on your question, is there's now an expectation that will instantaneously deliver a productivity gain. I think the gain has been that we've delivered that transformation in short order, but it will now take time to configure that in a way as we move out of the pandemic, in a way that might deliver productivity gain. But the key thing is, does it deliver patient benefit? And I think that's the sort of conversation we need to be having within our system, sharing experiences between primary, secondary, and community care, so that we're in a position to intellectually challenge any sort of argument which just says, why haven't you delivered more productivity?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Duncan's just made the point about how important that fourth wave is, and I think we do know that, and I think it's helpful, Paul, that you're highlighting that, because I think that really is a real issue for us. And we, as you say, we've been there before a little bit. This may be even bigger though, and therefore the fallout will be even bigger. Andrew, you wanted to just say a couple of words?
Well, I've got a question for Paul, actually, if that's
question,
okay. Yeah,
okay.
question. So a couple of words first is, Paul's alluded to a governance proposal that we took at a Chair's Chief Officers meeting earlier this week. That's scheduled to come through our development session in June for, we'll have a fairly comprehensive conversation about that and feedback into what I think Paul termed a consultation earlier on in his presentation here today. So that's all in order. So we'll be doing that at the end of June. I suspect we can probably send that around a little bit earlier and people can be familiar with that at an early point. So that's number one. Number two, sorry, a question to Paul from me, and Paul probably won't be surprised by some of this because it's been a little bit of a feature of some of our conversations, but I'll try and couch it in a slightly different way. So Paul's referred to the progress we've made in West Essex around our ICP. I think collectively as a board, we are proud about how far we've got, and how. But I think it's clear in our minds that we spent a lot of time doing this, and in terms of the journey, we've still got quite a long way to go. And I guess there is a degree of impatience amongst us all about moving on to those next stages and cementing this more locally with something that is a little bit more solid. So that's just a statement. When we talk about, we've been talking of the abbreviations ICS and ICP for a while, and Paul's alluded to that we've got an ICS now authorised. But from my perspective, an ICS is only an ICS if we've got the rest of the architecture working, which is the various ICPs in the geography that the ICS is operating. And that's clearly not the case at the moment. So we are aware that in Heights Valleys, that has moved forward in leaps and bounds in the last 12 months. And is at a point where we were when we, a few years ago, when we look in our rear view mirror. I think I'm not overly confident I really understand what's happening around the Hertfordshire Mental Health ICP. We don't need the detail here today, that's not the question. And I still have my doubts about what's happening in East and North Heights. And again, that's not the essence of the question either. I guess the issue is pace. So the danger for us in West Essex is that a couple of things. We just focus on the ICS level of governance, etc., but we don't have a lot of impetus put into the ICP side of things, Paul. The other danger there is that the pace may well be determined by those who are going slower rather than those who are going quicker as well. So I don't know whether you can do any reassurance to the West Essex board just about I guess, pace, priority, emphasis, and how we will move on to the rest of the system, which is the ICP level.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. I mean, I think what I can say is that one of these I've said pretty much all the way through from when I first met you, when I met other colleagues and listened to your thoughts about how integrated care partnerships would develop. Was that we shouldn't have one size fits all. We shouldn't work on the basis that everyone has to move in lockstep, so you wind up being stuck to the pace of the slowest. And that if we have one of our ICPs acting as a sort of vanguard, sort of leading by example, then that is a helpful spur and point of learning for the other two ICPs. You're right to say I think Herts Valley. Partly born out of, I think, the sort of the fire of the pandemic of the last 8 weeks. I think that has driven a much more rapid sort of pace around bringing together the various partners, and I think that's going to be important. I think we've seen a similar evolution, albeit from a much further back starting point in Herts, North and East Herts as well. But no, I'm really clear that. The only rate limiter for ICP development is the development of your system as a whole, because ICPs don't exist in isolation. They are part of the framing of how we work for our whole population and how we design and plan services that are then tailored to meet the particular needs of particular parts of our population and particular places within our overall footprint. So, I think it's very clear. I hope it's clear that no one should see that there's any break on the progress. But of course, within each geography, within each place, there has to be a consensus and a desire to move forward rapidly. And I think you've worked very hard with Lance and with colleagues at EPUT to move that forward, and indeed, as Peter was saying, with the county as well. So I think please don't in any way interpret anything that's going on in the other two ICPs as a reason not to press ahead and get on with consolidating the changes.
Ian Perry, you had a comment. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, actually, I think I was just typing it when Paul then asked the question beautifully. It was basically around how we're going to keep our relationships locally strong and make sure that we can still press on ahead with our plans as we've come so far. And we've done a lot of good work there around MSK and respiratory, and it'd be I think important for Paul to tell us if there's anything he is aware of in the system, sort of health, social, politically, that's going to affect that. That's all. It's just a request. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Yeah, I think we've sort of covered that a little bit. Any other questions? Otherwise, we will thank Paul. Thank you for that, Paul. You're very welcome to stay with us. I'm sure you've probably got other things to do, but you are very welcome to stay with us. And I'm sure we'll be speaking shortly and getting back to you on the with regard to the future governance within the ICS. So we'll get that done, and we'll start talking about it before we have our meeting. So thanks.
Thank you, Rob, and I probably will stay for a little while and enjoy the rest of your meeting. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. So we will move into the further into the agenda, which is my report. Actually, I probably should have said this at the beginning. If you can see the boardroom, you can probably see lots of boxes everywhere. So this is not just a dumping ground. Just to let people know, this is the distribution centre for PPE. So this is the PPE that's going out to our colleagues out on the front line. So all the boxes you can see are the goggles and all the other paraphernalia. So we're not an untidy lot down here. That's what that is. So just to go through some of the stuff that I've been involved in since the last meeting. So at an STP ICS now, ICS level, as Paul has said, we've received confirmation about a new ICS status at the end of April. And the meetings that we were having with various parts of the system, I've been having regular catch-ups with STP chairs, now virtually, of course. And of course, this virtual environment actually has also been beneficial in that meetings that in the past have been perhaps patchily attended or are now much better, notwithstanding some of the issues around the IT itself. Generally, it's getting better, and it means that people can get together. And I think because we know each other and knew each other before, it is working and it's getting better. So we're having regular meetings with chairs across the whole region. We've had a couple of chairs and CEO meetings now across the system. Jane Halpin, of course, starts on the 1st of June, but she has been attending some of those meetings and has been getting more involved. And as CCG chairs, we've been talking to her as well. So she's beginning, if you like, to get a flavour so that when she gets here, she will know her priorities and then she'll get to know the various parts of the system. And of course, although I was already having quite regular contact with the CCG chairs in Hertfordshire, that again has been ramped up during this crisis, where there's been a lot of joint sharing of practice, sharing of difficulties, sharing of heartache. So we've been having regular meetings, and that's been very helpful in the relationship building. Within West Essex, of course, we've been having our meetings with PAH now. So our pure PAH-ish secondary care and how they're working. So regular meetings with them, both at chair and AO level, but at all levels. And in addition to that, reinvigorating the journey that we are on with our One Health and Care Partnership, our ICP. So those meetings are now all have been happening, and those meetings going forward have been scheduled and being ramped up. So other parts of the system that we have caught up with, Brian Balmer, the Essex LMC lead. We've had a couple of meetings with him during this crisis. There have been some issues that have bubbled up. And again, keeping him on board and keeping him up to date has been really important, and that's appreciated both ways. We've had a general catch up with Robert Halfon, our MP. Again, he's very appreciative of being kept, up to speed on what is happening both within our West Essex system and beyond. Obviously, you guys will know that we've been having the regular catch-ups with you separately. So we've been having the lay members catch-ups, which were already happening. But the GP board members have really stepped up to the plate here and acting as our sort of conduit between the board and the emerging new leaders out there, our PCN leads or clinical directors, and starting to bring them more and more into the firing line, more into the decision making and how we work out our strategy. grupand that's working really well, and I appreciate what the board members have done there. We had an NHS England and Radmore set up a chairs meeting across the region in two groups. There's another one due to happen next month. The locality membership meetings have restarted, so both all three now have attended. Harlow, Uttlesford and Epping. So the GPs on the ground are fully sort of informed on what is happening, both with a rundown from Andrew in all of those sessions of what's happening in a sort of wider sense, but at a local level, getting them really understanding what is needed and how general practice might look into the future. So having their input is really important. I think that's probably it from me. So, right, we're moving on to the chairman. No, that's not the chairman's report. No chairman's actions, Sharon. Good. So, Andrew, do you want to take us through the Chief Officer's report as we normally do?
So we're back into the usual run of things. So we've got a fairly comprehensive Chief Officer's report. And after I've done my 5 minutes here, what I will do is I'll invite the individual directors just to take us through their particular sections. But if I just give a little bit of an introduction, and I'll try and avoid some of the overlap with Paul's presentation and some of the things that Rob has said as well. So our last public board meeting, so at the very last minute, we turned it into a little bit more of a private meeting, but it is still classified as a public meeting. Well, that was on the 26th of March, and at that particular point in time, as a CCG, we've been operating on a from home basis for around about a week. And there was only a couple of days before that meeting that the PM announced the more severe lockdown in the country. That was on Monday the 23rd. So it's been quite a bizarre last 2 months. I guess I'm just coming towards the end of my 34th year in the NHS, and I've never seen anything like this. So it is pretty unique. So how would I sort of just sum up the last 2 months? Well, the last 2 months have probably gone in two phases, and Paul's slide talks about the 4 phases of the NHS. But the activity of the CCG has been very much in the first of those 2 phases to begin with. So first of all, there was that phase 1, which was how we've reacted to the pandemic. So it was a shock to the system, whether that was just an involuntary knee jerk or not, but effectively we took fairly decisive action very quickly, to protect staff and to move on to a very different footing. So to some extent, a lot of the work, or the traditional work of the CCG, fell by the wayside. So we often talk about contract performance, longer term service development. All of that went on hold in this first particular phase. We slimmed down the governance of the organisation, so all the subcommittees were put on hold. Everyone was on remote working, but actually what we were doing, working through a small number of cells within the CCG, we were actively responding to the situation. The details in some of the dialogue that the directors will take us through, but we've been actively supporting primary care. We've been actively working with system partners, coordinating, and we've been running an emergency management team as well. More recently, though, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've gone into that phase 2. So we're lifting our head. The numbers of deaths, cases, etc., are dropping. COVID-19 certainly hasn't gone away. So where we are now is we're getting very much back into our stride of some of those wider activities. So we're thinking about how we are planning services into the future, the whole restoration, if that's or the recovery phase. There's many terms talked about that. We're all into that, and we're finding our feet again in some of the more traditional ways of working. But we are still working remotely from home. We're extensively using the IT, as Rob has alluded to. And to be perfectly honest, probably the work of the CCG in the last 2 or 3 weeks is pretty much coming back to full activity. So behind the scenes now, we are making preparation for a phased return back into St Margaret's. We're waiting for a green light from up above. We have no insight as to when that might happen, but maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We have members of staff who are keen to come back into our buildings, and we've been actively looking at how we can open up buildings safely and operate again from St Margaret's where we need to do. Curiously, my life over the last 2 or 3 weeks has probably focused a little bit more in Essex than it has within Hertfordshire and West Essex, in that the emergency response, so it was a level 4 public emergency, and it still is a level 4 public emergency, has effectively been managed through mechanisms in Essex. But I'm very proud and pleased to report that actually that's not been a top-down process. That's been very much a bottom-up process with the strong operational foundation that we've established in West Essex over many years now, being at the core of what we've been doing. So in essence, in that command and control structure, we've been letting the system know how we've been getting on with things, rather than the system telling us to get on with things. So I'm really pleased about that. As we go into the next phases, then the emphasis is coming away from that county-based response, more into an ICS-based response. So again, those relationships are now building again back into Hertfordshire and West Essex. Not that they decayed. It's just that we've been focused elsewhere. And we're now actively working again with partners across the STP, now the ICS, around those recovery plans. And we can see within the ICS or the former STP that some of that project management, the PMO office, is coming back to life and coordinating our work. So, as I say, it's been a bit of a bizarre couple of months. We're certainly not out of this yet, but over the next month or so, while I'm still around in the CCG, then we'll be building on what we've done in the last 2 months and getting ourselves back onto an even keel very quickly now. What I'll do, Rob, is I'll just pass over to the individual directors. We usually start with Jane first, and they can hopefully just give us some brief highlights from their reports.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so just to say, we've taken a different approach with our element of the quality report this month. We held an extraordinary quality committee last week, and we thought it would be of benefit for the board to have an appraisal of what systems look like and what the system's response has been throughout this COVID outbreak. So we've tried to focus on areas of risk, mitigations, what we've learnt and what we might want to keep. There's an amalgamation of papers within the report, and a number of my fellow executive colleagues have written these papers. So I will give some headlines, but I'm very happy if others want to chip in, because this is teamwork across the team. So probably starting off with PAH. Oversight of PAH has largely been directly with NHSI, NHSE through a command and control structure, but with the CCG maintaining daily SITREP reporting, so we have day-to-day oversight and understanding of system pressures and status, and PAH response to specific challenges. From a system leadership perspective, there's been weekly informal operational calls between Andrew, Tony, Lance, Steph Lawton, the coup, and Alex Green as the Essex County Council Locality Director, and in her EPUT role. And through these calls, we've been able to obtain an insight into PAH's response and specific challenges. We've also worked with partners to facilitate the development of new pathways in response to managing the incident. And some of the things we've seen through this have been an increase in clinical leadership and decision making between partners. So I think overall our perspective would be that the hospital has managed effectively and adapted pathways and responses to the emerging picture. I thought it might just be helpful just in terms of a very brief update. These are just stats from yesterday, the 20th of May. So in total, PAH has tested 2,779 patients. 2,164 have been tested negative, 504 positive. There are 111 patients waiting for results. 294 patients have been transferred or discharged. Small number went to Papworth when support was needed at the very peak in April. Current position is to have 8 current inpatients with COVID, 2 ventilated, 6 non-ventilated, and very sadly overall 202 patients have died. I don't know if anybody, Tony, if you want to say anything else around PAH, or whether I've captured the profile there.
Nothing to add, Jane. I'll pick up some more under my item. Thanks.
Thank you. Moving on then to community response. In terms of the community, the aim was to try and provide care in patients' usual place of residence wherever possible, minimise the number of different health and care professionals going into individuals' homes by working very much in a multidisciplinary team way and maximising the use of technology, simplifying referral pathways, by increasing range of support provided by the single point of access, and support rapid discharge from the acute and community hospitals in line with the NHS guidance that was distributed to us. Positives have been seen in strengthening role and function of the single point of access, which has been available 24/7. And that's been boosted by the addition of GPs redeployed from PAH urgent care service. Also direct support from PAH consultant hotline 7 days a week, and direct support from St Clair's Hospice, and the CCG CHC team has strengthened the MDT approach. And we've seen flexible and innovative responses from providers to support the system. Particular focus on care homes, and that's been one of the works of the cells with very much with Tony and the transformation team. I think we recognised early on that particular risks and vulnerability amongst this group, which we think potentially were not necessarily recognised well by the centre. And so there was an emerging picture really of the risks and issues in our local care homes. So as a result of that, with various partners across the system, we set up a West Essex care home hub, which was established towards the end of April. And that has done a huge amount of work to monitor and map outbreaks of COVID within the care homes, and also to develop a RAG rating system. The hub meets on a daily basis, and the membership for that includes Essex County Council's commercial team, their quality team and adult social care, the CCG's quality team, infection prevention and control leads, CHC and transformation team, EPUT community and mental health teams, and we also have CQC and Public Health England. And I think that now has been up and running for over a month, and it's really strengthened. So I think we all feel we've got a really good grip on what's going on in the care homes. We have nominated leads for each of the care homes, and depending on the RAG rating, we have either a daily, twice a week or weekly call into those care homes. That is the information is consolidated on a daily basis, and at the meeting on a daily basis, we look at all the evidence of what's going on in terms of PPE, infection in the home, staffing levels, etc. And then as a system, look at how we provide mutual aid going in. And I think we all feel actually that this is probably the foundations for a model moving forward, not just for COVID. And I think there's a much greater input for us as a CCG into the care homes. Traditionally, we've had quite a lot to do with the nursing homes, but less with the care homes. But I also think Essex County Council colleagues have valued the MDT approach and the value if we've got all the different perspectives coming together to provide support. So I think from something that was quite difficult at the beginning, I think that is growing into something that will be really positive and something we can retain moving forward. And we're just in the process at the moment with all of the homes in West Essex. We've had a programme of enhanced IP&C training, and we've had staff going in or delivering virtually, and that's been done in consultation with the homes because obviously they're independent businesses, and we want to maintain good relationships with them. So we've negotiated in terms of how that training is delivered into the homes. There's a large section around primary care. I will leave that for Peter to pick that up also in his report. I think the other area, probably one of our areas of greatest concern, is around safeguarding both adults and children. And we know that the lockdown potentially subjects vulnerable children and adults to limited family contact, loss of protective networks and factors, and an absence of outside oversight. We've been having weekly calls as a system with Essex Safeguarding Board to try and keep a grip of what's going on across the system, and also begin to plan, because we think there will be a bit of a surge in terms of safeguarding issues as we begin to come out of COVID, and there's greater sight across the system. I think next steps really, so just a few bullet points: preparation for a surge in safeguarding activity, re-establishing professional relationships with children and families, to think about capacity of staff and staff returning from redeployment and how we support them, impact of staff experiences, which I think may be significant for many staff, new models for care home quality and oversight. What's our system offer going to be moving forward from what we've learned? I think we need to have some further consideration of IP&C capacity in a changed world, because we think there'll be likely much greater requirement for support across the system, both for primary care and ongoing within care homes. Impact both on adults and children's mental health. As a result, we know there's heightened anxiety and evidence of mental health. Impact on population who've not accessed services during the pandemic. there's a lot more information in the report, but probably those were the headlines. And I know that Peter Boylan may want to come in here just with a reflection on how that quality committee went and kind of viewed as our lay lead.
Is that all right, Rob?
Yeah, just before you do that, Peter, can I just check, can everybody hear everybody else? I'm getting some reports that the sound is sort of going in and out. Can people hear? Okay, thumbs up. Okay, it may just be you, Simon.
Sound's been okay for me.
You are. Okay, so most people are getting this okay, but if it is fading in where you are, apologies. And also just to let you know, Ian Tompkins had to step out the room for an hour. He's got an Essex Strategic Coordinating Group meeting, but he will be back for his bits later on, hopefully. Sorry, Peter, yeah.
Yeah, so in the Quality Committee paper that you've got as part of the board papers, I've written a couple of sentences in there, but clearly that was done, I think, the day after the Quality Committee, which was only last week. And I've had a little bit of time to reflect on what happened that day, and I thought it's probably worth sharing with members of the board about the different approach that we took, and I think some of the reflections about what we've learned from that. So please just indulge me just for a couple of minutes. So on the 13th of May, I chaired an extraordinary meeting of the CCG Quality Committee that was quite rightly very different from the usual style of assurance meeting and focused purely on the impact of COVID-19 and the effect that it was having locally and the collective response of the system to plan and manage during what can only be described as unprecedented circumstances in living memory. The committee invited a range of senior managers and leaders to present brief papers on topical areas such as secondary care, care homes, primary care, personal protective equipment, community services and children's services, the impact on adult and children's safeguarding. Authors were asked to focus on key headlines, the risks, the actions taken, and areas of good practice. They were also asked about how this experience can be used to change how we operate in the future. The committee heard how every part of the system had been impacted by the pandemic. Members heard of the significant levels of transformation that had been made possible in a relatively short period. Staff and services had found different ways to operate with some evidence of improved efficiency. We heard about some of the unintended consequences of lockdown, including James just referred to, the impact of domestic abuse and concerns about children who were invisible from mainstream services. The CCG continue to work with other partners to mitigate these risks wherever possible. The CCG has managed to develop its own workaround in accessing and distributing PPE to providers in urgent need in the early stages of the pandemic, and is now focusing on ensuring more sustainable systems are in place for the future. There's also a focus on providing a range of support for care homes across West Essex. The agenda provided a broad range of subject matter to be heard, and I very much hope contributed to the broader thinking about learning for the future. Work has now started on the recovery phase and established new ways of mainstream working. I'd very much like to recognise and thank the commitment and professionalism shown by all CCG members of staff in supporting residents of West Essex at what has been and what continues to be such a challenging time for everybody. And I think on reflection, finally, and actually just listening to the board this morning, I think it's not just about the services and the way that we work, but actually I think there's something about how we operate our committees as well. So I, for one, will be looking to how we can make changes to how we operate the Quality Committee, for instance, going forward, because I think there's been some really For me, it was a really interesting and different approach that we took last week. And I think there's some mileage to be gained by looking at that in more detail going forwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Very helpful. Anything else for Jane? Otherwise, where do we go next normally?
Tony, I think.
Tony?
Hi, yeah. Just a very brief update. So the paper contains sort of an update of work of the transformation team and the progress we've sort of made against the transformation plans. We've got a specific item on the agenda under item 11 where I'll go through sort of local context about how we're developing our plans in response to phase 2 and 3. So I won't go in detail through any of the details contained in my report around transformation. In terms of the team, just making reference to Andrew said around how we structured ourselves. The transformation teams operating part of an out of hospital cell, which didn't include primary care because that was separately. Responsibilities with operational oversight and very, very active and busy in terms of facilitating and working with the system to implement changes either through transformation or implementing COVID guidance. So in terms of just a very brief overview around a lot of operational overview, everyone would be aware, all providers, PAH, EPUT, mental health and community focused initially on the outbreak around reducing bed occupancy, obviously to make sure that we had capacity to respond to COVID admissions, and also there was the stopping of non-essential routine activity across all providers. And as mentioned in a number of conversations now, a significant switch to non-face-to-face activity through virtual, and that was not just in primary care, PAH, that was also with mental health services and also with the community teams too. And the other bit is obviously a priority was working on is how we prioritise patients according to risk and how they were supported. In terms of sort of some stats, in terms of bed occupancy, PAH bed occupancy is ranged between 50 and 70%, and bed occupancy still remains low, as people will be aware. And the same for EPUT, bed occupancy has been around 60 to 70%. And again, it's levels that they are still sustaining now as we move into the next phase, but we know that will change with bringing online more services. And in terms of demand, you've got a few graphs in the pack in terms of ED performance. At the very lowest, I think PAH's ED demand went down to about 110 patients in a day, which is nothing compared to what we know we've seen over previous months. It is going back up this week. I think we've seen a highest number back up to 280 in PH, which is encouraging that people are coming back into the hospital. But we still need to keep an eye on that they're coming into our ED for the right reasons. And of low numbers and all the great work that the trust have done at the front door, our 4-hour standard has been in the 90s for probably a couple of weeks now. Some of that is down to demand, but some of it is down to how they've streamlined processes and what they've done. And I think out of 150 trusts, we're up in number 50 in terms of ED performance at the moment compared to others. And I think we were down in the 90 region before COVID. So that's what I was going to run through from my report because we've got a bit more of a detailed discussion under item 11.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. We could probably leave any questions till that presentation. Do we get to Peter or John next? Or even Christine?
Shall I pick up?
Please, Peter.
Yeah. Okay, if I take us to page 23 in the report, I'll just give you a few headlines just to draw out a few issues. The first issue I just want to mention is 111 faced a very difficult time because it was the point of direction for COVID-19 positive patients. And that graph really shows how the volumes were very high and that they recovered in the recent weeks, and that COVID calls were right at the heart of driving that demand, but it meant that patients had a lot of abandoned calls. And for practices, they then received a lot of general information inquiries. So for a couple of weeks, it was really tricky at the heat of the problem to handle all of that. We agreed a protocol with HUC, with our fellow CCG commissioners, because serves 5 CCG areas, and we aligned the extended access resource to give them some more clinical capacity to help support what was a very demanding time for them. And that extended access capacity has now been turned back on to normal business in the new context, now that one-on-one has settled down. On page 24, we talked a lot about virtual working in general practice, and the model has completely transformed, and as many GP colleagues know much more than I do. And that pie chart for me summarises, well, this is what new general practice is looking like at the minute. Around about 2/3 of contacts are by telephone. And when we say virtual, most of that is telephone for many reasons, but it illustrates the sort of the difference that is happening. But it still is important for 10 to 15% of work to be done on a face-to-face basis, which presents an infection control challenge about how that's delivered safely and appropriately. And as part of that face-to-face challenge, practices clubbed together on a PCM basis to work out on these clinical hubs how they were going to deliver observations and diagnosis and management for people with COVID positive symptoms. The volumes of activity have been low, but that system has been in place, and should there be a return of high respiratory volumes, then those hubs leave us in a good position relatively about thinking how we might be able to respond to that particular face-to-face management. The West Essex IT team have been outstanding in terms of getting lots of software and hardware solutions out to practices, and so every practice is offering patients 100% of the time video consultations, often sending the patient the link, so you can follow that link simply if you've got a smartphone or tech and you've got Wi-Fi. You can get through if you need to with the GP or the team on video. We've put a lot more laptops out there and a lot more monitors to help this digital environment. And I think what we've done is to put a lot in place in the last 6-8 weeks, and we're going through a process to think, okay, well, we achieved the rapid short-term objective. How sustainable is this going forward, and how can we improve it and fine-tune it? And GPs are telling us your video does take longer for patients when it's required, and in some circumstances there is a risk level for doctors, which is something that when we get at the end of this, at the other side of this, we would want to bring some more people back face to face than we've been able to during this period. The other thing I just want to draw attention to is there's a certain set of activities that have just not got done in general practice under national guidance because they've presented too much infection control risk or they've been of lower priority. And in our return to normal plans at the moment, we're asking practice to think, well, how many of those might we be able to return to normal? Cervical screening perhaps being one example where some practices have deferred routine cervical screening, but clearly over a longer period of time, that's something that needs to be addressed. And in early June, we should have a sense of the sorts of issues that we need to do differently in primary care going forward. On a practical note, I think we should note that since the last board meeting, in terms of primary care contracting, Addison House and Barbara Castle Surgery have formally merged. They are now operate as a single surgery Addison House. They operate from both sites and will fully intend to do so, given the growing population in Harlow. And they are a combined list size now around 20,000 patients. So a fifth of the patients in Harlow managed by that combined partnership. And the final thing I just wanted to say is lots more detail in the papers. We've been doing a lot of support to vulnerable patients through the Shielded national initiative, and also with Essex County colleagues to make sure that everyone who's at home and can't leave their house or is nervous about leaving their house knows how to access county council support services, and the social prescribers may be proactively contacting them. And that is a large group of patients who are nervous at home, anxious at home, who we're conscious is a new situation that we've created, and we need to be managing those patients carefully. But the voluntary sector, as ever, have put a lot of extra support around patients, and it's critical that through the next 12 months we work with our voluntary sector colleagues, as has already been identified, to make sure that that support is available. It's something as simple as delivering medicines, and if you haven't got a friend and family, how do you get those medicines, if you're on repeat medicines, to a patient's home safely? It's a practical sort of example of the sort of things voluntary sector have been helping with. I'll stop there, but there's more detail there if board members need to ask questions.
Thanks, Peter. I wonder if it's just worth highlighting the collaborative working that went on, particularly around setting up the hubs. I know the hub in Harlow, to set that up, I mean, apart from doing it was a collaboration between GPs, CCGs, Harlow Health Centres Trust, EPUT, the IT team. I think there's been, that's been good, demonstrating that joint working.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think the practices have had given mutual aid on a sort of smaller level as well, where we've had practices with doctors that are shielded or unwell, and they've helped their neighbours up the road in Uttlesford particularly. And the other thing I should have mentioned is that Chris Moss and Sarah Crane have done an amazing job of developing this bulletin, because there's been a lot of information that's coming out of practices every day. So here's the latest guidance on X, here's the latest guidance on Y, and they've been interpreting that and summarising it in one document that hopefully has helped practices to digest what's been a storm of changing context every week of the latest guidance on X, Y and Z. But definitely the PCNs, we've gone into this with some good leadership at PCN director level and good relationships. And I think GP colleagues would probably attest that's been a real asset that's helped us coping so far, and something we need definitely going forward to develop further.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. Are we on to John?
Yep. Good afternoon. Yes, I'm going to talk to you about the finance and the performance issue. The first thing I would say is that there is a performance report attached to Andrew's overarching report, which is the year-end performance position for the CCG. I wasn't going to pretend or take an awful lot of time to go through this in detail, but I'm happy to do so if people wish. I think the key thing I would point out, just picking up some of the areas that have been mentioned earlier, the A&E performance at PAH ended the year at 79.7, which was on an upward trajectory, and as Tony's already alluded to it, current performance is considerably better than that. The other area that I know the board members have had concern on is the cancer 62-day standard. And again, whilst we've ended that at 81%, it too is on an improving trajectory. A couple of areas just for us to keep an eye on are length of stay, both in elective and non-elective. And as you can see from the other hospitals, Addenbrooke's, the A&E, they are not reporting because they are part of a national pilot. Similar in Barts, they are part of a national pilot on referral to treatment reporting. So that's why we have no information for them. Other than that, unless there are any questions specifically on the performance aspect, I'll move on to finance. As you know, we would normally be sitting talking to you about a month one report, which, if honest, would be a very, very bare bones report, given the fact that a number of the data sources have an inbuilt lag into them, particularly things like prescribing and the activity data. This has also been, if you like, exacerbated by the fact that since the 1st of April, we've been operating under a different financial regime. Due to the impacts of COVID and the additional costs that the health service are having to bear, the historical payment mechanism, payment by results, has effectively been suspended and has been replaced by a series of block contracts. Now, these block contracts have been calculated nationally and have been notified to CCGs, and we're in the process of paying them on a monthly basis. The period of this was originally intended to run from the 1st of April to the 31st of July, but we've already been advised that this will be extended to 31st of October. The reality is that even at that point, it is highly likely that we will have to extend the block contract process probably through until the end of this current financial year, but I won't dwell too much on that. I think Andrew has already agreed, and I think he's maybe just got to, I'll just agree with the chairs of F&P, Audit and Health and Care. that I do a more detailed presentation at whatever those virtual committees are in that thing, but also take the board through that at our seminar in June and take you through in detail some of the changes. In terms of the other area, in terms of closing off the old financial year, very pleased to say, I think I reported to the board in March that we were due to submit our annual accounts, having hit our control total. In the end, we actually ended up with a very small surplus of £5,000. The accounts were submitted in April. We were due at this board meeting, in fact, to sign off those accounts as final. However, due again to COVID-19, the deadline for submission of the accounts has been extended until the 26th of June. So therefore, as a result of that, we are not at the moment able to sign off the accounts due to the fact that the financial ledger, from which the accounts are derived, has effectively been closed until the 18th of June for a whole host of national reasons. I'll pause at that stage and see if there were any questions, or apologies, is it Christine next? If not, I'll pass on to Christine.
Any questions for John? Any comments? Let me just.
From Ian Perry says, hot clinics may be less busy at the moment. Come August, September, every cough and fever will be hot, whether it's COVID or not. So, primary care network, hot clinics and community pharmacies will be busy again.
Yeah, and I think Peter's alluded to the fact that we're certainly not going to be closing our hot clinics. We need to be ready for that.
And so it's Ian again. It was just talking about Consultant Connect was a really good idea 2 years ago, but because the consultants were so busy, they didn't really pick up the phone. But now more than ever, they might be more readily available to speak to us on the end of the phone, just to reduce referral rates, which will inevitably go up when we're catching up.
That's a good point. It didn't work very well. I thought that was being looked into. Chris, do you know anything about that?
So it's probably the subject of a conversation a bit later today, or the next iteration of it is. But this, we need to do a complete rethink about the way primary care approaches its day-to-day job. It might not in the end change very much, but we need to take this opportunity, and particularly while there's an ambition to change service design, to jump on that and move it as far forward as we can. And the idea of better, more effective conversations and working with consultant colleagues as well as community colleagues to enhance how professionals, clinicians can function, but then for the benefit of patients, so that only those who need to go to another site go to another site. So it's work in progress, Ian. Absolutely take your point. I think there might be different solutions for different areas, but it's well made.
Thanks. Does Christine have a?
I've got a couple of comments. I didn't contribute an awful lot. I guess my work has mainly been supporting other work streams for the last couple of months. But I'll make just a couple of comments. First of all, I normally put in something about mortality. I deliberately didn't in this report. HSMR reporting is not is 2 months old, so it does not reflect anything to do with COVID, and it's hard to know how you would interpret it anyway. So I've deliberately not given that sort of status for the PNH site. I have had a conversation with their medical examiner, strategic mortality oversight lead. The numbers during the peak of COVID went high, as you would expect, and higher than many places in east of England. Of interest, and I've seen total numbers, but I can't. I don't understand the footfall of different hospitals enough to be able to interpret that. But PAH's total mortality doesn't no longer stands out, but for a while it did seem to, and that reflects the closeness to London, we believe. Of note, in the last couple of weeks, overall numbers of deaths in PAH has fallen to levels lower than ever seen. Well, seen in the time of the detailed medical death review process. So I think that may reflect the bed occupancy, but may also just reflect at the moment we are not seeing the much feared rise in non-COVID illness and death that was predicted. That may be because we've not got far enough through, or it may be that that's not quite how it's going to look. We'll have to wait and see. Not covered in the PAH mortality work is the mortality in care homes, and I just want to note the difficulty in some care homes relating to the high levels of deaths, and that's very much been some care homes and not all, but does not necessarily reflect the care home itself. It's the nature of who's been in the buildings, probably, but I'm waiting, I hope, for some national direction in how that the understanding of all of that will follow. Other stuff at PAH of note, I'd like to just note the work that's been done around the long length of stay and the numbers with more than 14 days in hospital has dropped very significantly due to some very hard and focused work by the clinicians at PAH, working extremely well with community colleagues. I'd like to note that. There's a comment about cancer in the paper. We saw, as expected, a major drop-off in referrals, and that's starting to rise, but there will be changes in pathways in a number of places that will be sustained going forward. And also note the use of the independent sector to create both capacity and clean sites for cancer work.
Thanks, Chris. Duncan has just texted Adam Brooks looking at how GP referrals can be sent in such a way that triage by consultant to decide if advice and guidance would be sufficient, or telephone consult with patient or face-to-face. I guess this is, I guess that just raises the question is that sometimes having that personal discussion via a telephone call, rather than trying to infer from a written referral. So the Consult Connect still sort of sounds like an option that might be good in a lot of circumstances. I think that might be Maggie rather than Nagy. HSMR deaths, would it be useful to look at our comparative excess death figures?
Maggie may have a view, but one of the problems at the moment with looking at deaths is that although there is COVID reporting, the total hospital-based deaths and community-based deaths, there's a lag, and we just aren't through far enough yet, unless Maggie knows something that I don't.
Okay. Right. It says on my etiquette I should be doing a temperature check. So you've all got to take your temperature, I guess. No, I think it's like, do people feel they need a break? It's a long time to be sitting. Would you like 5 minutes? I think there's a thumbs up there, top left-hand corner. Yep. Okay. Right. Shall we reconvene at, what is that, in
11:40.
10 minutes you've got. Yeah. Make the most of it. 11:40. Okay, is everybody regathering? And John.
I did send some on that replied. And see, I can pass some on.
Okay, before we just move in, so the next item on the agenda is the draft annual report and accounts. Simon, can we do that? Ian's not in the room. He's will be back.
Yes, that's fine.
You're happy we can do it, can we?
Yeah, as long as John's online, that's fine.
Yep. Okay, everyone back online?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so this is item 10. So this is the draft annual report and accounts and notes. Do you want to lead on that, Simon, or start it off and John can chip in?
Yeah, we're in a slightly unusual position, has been referenced on numerous occasions this year in two counts in respect of the accounts for the annual report being still at a unaudited stage, which they wouldn't normally be at this stage. But also because of this, we also have a crossover between the tenure of two accountable officers. So that raises two issues in respect of the fact that as the board will see from the paper, that a recommendation is made that you are not in a position at this stage to sign off the accounts or the annual report, and therefore the request has been made for this to be delegated, but also with the acknowledgement that the report before you is in draft, and I can confirm changes have been made since then to small areas. But I will let John pick up on those because, of course, many are relevant to accounts.
Simon, can I just start before you go on? Sorry. So will this be ready before the 1st of June to sign?
No, and that's due to the accounts. Essentially, one of the certifications that you have towards the end of the annual report is that the accountable officer signs the accounts following them being before board, and board or those who are delegated on behalf of the board will not be seeing them in their fully audited state until at least the 18th of June.
So just
let me chip in. So what we need to do today. So there is, as Simon quite rightly says, there's a couple of, I'll call them technicalities that we've just got to deal with in due course. What we've got is the annual report and our accounts. In essence, the auditor's final sign-off won't take, we haven't got it because of one of the certificates can't be produced because the whole systems have been closed down. So what we should do today is, I think, assume that these reports are in good order, and as a board, we need to determine whether we would accept them in their current form or not. And then what we need to do is we need to give delegated responsibility and authority through to Rob as chairman to make any adjustments on our behalf in the next few weeks, which will include an additional signature, which I think will be Jane Halpin, and we'll also get the assurance from auditors in due course. I'm sure in doing that, Rob will send out the relative details to everyone in good time so that people can see that. So does that work, Simon?
So I've actually made the recommendations that the board delegates to the chair, the board chair, obviously Rob, the accountable officer at the time, which will be Jane, and with the support of our lay member for governance, Stephen King, so who will essentially sign off on behalf of the board, and then Jane would sign the annual report, so that full governance is in play and the board can be assured that it's had the rigour that it would normally have.
But in essence, today, we have to be content as a board with what's in front of us. That's the big issue today, and to give that delegated authority.
You have to be content with what is before you, yes.
Okay. Are we content? Do we want to just bring Stephen in, just to, it's been through audit committee, just for some comment? Yeah, Stephen? Mute, unmute.
Hello, can you hear me now? By way of assurance to the board, the audit committee have had sight of possibly a slightly earlier draft than this and have made substantive comments and have also gone through the accounts, and we're aware of the changes that need to be made subject to the auditors. I think the one area that I would appreciate colleagues' review, which was the progress against agreed targets, which the audit committee had no sight of when we met, has just been, it was just circulated in the last few days, and it will be helpful just for board member colleagues to review that and give us any feedback, whether they think those are the accurate representation. I've no reason to believe they're not, but it would be good to have some other eyes on those numbers. But other than that, I can give you assurance that they're in good shape. So there are some details, certainly in sort of member representation, member details, and one or two others which we know need to be corrected.
Peter Boylan.
Yeah, I've just got a few comments having read the paper fresh this week, and I will put these in an email to Simone. I'll send those off to you as soon as we're finished here. But there are many around governing body membership, such as Dean Westcott is on there, but it tells us that he hasn't been part of this governing body during that financial year. Just a question about why he's there. Terry Cutmore and the accuracy of some of that information. Membership of the Quality Committee, Bobby Graham is not a member of that committee. Down there is. What did you last hear?
Okay, we're a bit hit and miss when you from the members of the committee.
So I mentioned about Dean Westcott is included.
Got that bit. It was just after that.
You heard about Terry Cutmore and Gagan Mahindra?
Okay, so that's when it went a bit patchy, yeah.
So it's just a request for a check that the information that is in their two sections is still accurate, and it still refers to Terry as currently chairing something. It needs a refresh. Yeah. And membership of the Quality Committee, it states that Bobby Graham is a and the vice chairman of that committee is the secondary care consultant. And just a final question about acronyms throughout reports and features deals of acronyms. And in terms of Bobby being responsible for PPE, and we're all focused on personal protective equipment right now. Just another example of where we shouldn't be using acronyms wherever possible.
Good example.
It's a PPI.
Engagement. Sorry, Bob.
It's down as patient and public engagement on in the report.
We changed it for that very reason. But then we joked about PPI, missold policies, didn't we?
Yeah.
That's why it got changed to PPE.
Don't use it, serious.
Yeah, just say it. Okay, thanks for that. So you've let Simon know all that. Yeah.
I will send an email to her right now.
Thanks. Are there any other issues on the progress against targets paper? Everybody's comfortable with that. Do we need to walk through it, or have people got started with it? We've mentioned some of the things already. Andrew, John has mentioned the A&E performance, etc. Is there anything on there that anybody needed to highlight or take issue with, or?
Well, in the table of contents, it says process against agreed targets, so it should be progress, I guess. That was on page 2, but it's on page 28 is the substantive bit.
It says progress at the top of the paper itself. Sorry, anybody waving? Anybody got anything else? If not, are you content with that process?
Rob?
Yes, who's that?
Duncan?
Yes, Duncan.
I noticed that the membership of the board, role and attendance, I don't figure in that table. Page 68.
We should.
Yeah.
Okay, Simone, have you got that?
Yes, I have. As I identified in the cover paper that there were draft amendments coming through. So as I would stress yet again that to the board, this is why I've asked for this to be delegated to the 3 members to approve the actual final annual report and accounts. As I said, this is we're on an unusual stage, but I'm noting all the comments made.
Okay.
When's the submission deadline?
It's the 25th of June.
So it's after our June meeting.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so we've got time for people to look through anything. So do you want anything to come through to you, Simone? I suppose it doesn't matter as long as it.
Yeah, I would also note that the performance data, that it was sent as a separate paper on Friday the 15th of May, because the performance information wasn't released in time to be produced as part of the main cover page of the board, and therefore what you would have received in the draft report had been updated. So I'd draw that to the members' attention.
Just a quick, can I add a quick point, Rob?
Yeah, Peter.
Just Simone, I'll send you a latest CQC position for the practices, because it's we've got one that's January, we've got a later one, and we should note that we have an outstanding practice in West Essex in Old Harlow Health Centre, so it'd be good to put that in the annual report, and a couple of other things have changed, but I'll give you the very latest table.
That would be helpful, yes. Just to note that I'm keeping in close contact with our external auditors as well, so I do really need any updates as soon as possible, please. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, there was a bit of muttering going on here. We're kind of just getting a feeling that there's quite a lot of changes. And is it going beyond Steve and myself looking at that? Should it come back to the next meeting? Because we will have time. So if it's the 25th of June,
we have a meeting on that day.
Could we agree it then, and it goes at the end of that day? Is that all right, Simone?
Yeah, I'm sure we can pick it up through the timetabling, but obviously it has to be absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's bring it back to the 25th of June rather than it being a chair's action.
Rob, would it be possible for us to be able to submit the accounts prior to that? The the ledger as such, and therefore their ability to submit the accounts, reopen on the 18th of June. I think has been highlighted in the paper, and I'm sure Stephen King will confirm, when we discussed the accounts with the auditors, and in fairness, they had one or two little things to do, but at the moment I'm only aware of 2 changes, neither of which change the bottom line of the accounts. They are presentational changes in relation to treatment of certain transactions, 2 transactions in particular. So they will be amended on the 18th of June. I'm just thinking on the 25th of June, that will be the main submission day, and it will be a bit of a panic and rush to get the accounts in on that day.
So I'm less concerned about, strangely, I'm less concerned about the financial part of that. So if you and Stephen are content with that, I would have thought that would be fine.
Okay, thank you.
I'd certainly be content with that.
Okay, well let's go with that then. So the finance part of it can go earlier. The other part we will just finalise on the 25th. Okay, thanks everyone. Okay, Tony, we've got a presentation. Yeah, can we share that?
Yeah, bear with me while I try and put it on the screen.
Yep, well done. Yep.
Okay. Okay, so I'll start then. So what you've got over the next 5 minutes or so is just an update for you of the early plans that we're putting in place in response to the next phases of COVID, which we've had mentioned several times already today. So this will give a bit of a more local context to the presentation that Paul gave earlier. And also we need to link it into a part 2 paper, which James will cover around the overall recovery plan. So I'll try not to duplicate things I've already covered off, but bear with me if I do. So the presentation I'll go through is a summary of a draft sort of plan, the early plan that we pulled together with PAH and EPA and Essex County Council for our response predominantly to the Simon Stevens letter that came out a couple of weeks ago. And within the Simon Stevens letter, there are some key asks of the system, all the ones that you'd be very familiar with in terms of the conversations we've already had. You know, stepping up the non-COVID urgent services and bringing online our routine work, our elective work, building on sort of the changes that we've already put in place, recognising that there's going to be an increase in demand and some of that is unknown, particularly around community health services and mental health, and obviously maintaining a focus on our high-risk patients. And a significant piece of delivering all of that is the requirement for organisations to be able to have a clear segregation of COVID and non-COVID activity. And linked also with that is around building the confidence of our patients in terms of accessing services. Key piece of work that needs to sit behind this that underpins all of these plans is linked to how we are going to bring all the activity back on stream, and that will be around that we will be doing, and I'll make reference to that when I run through the next steps. So working with partners, we no surprise come up with some underpinning principles that sit behind our plans. We want to return to normal levels as soon as possible. We want to keep our solutions for being able to deliver the ask from the Simon Stevens letter within the ICP footprint, geography and within the organisations, and also around our focus being on, as Jane mentioned actually in her presentation, is, you know, is home first. Our priority is still making sure that we can, where it's possible, to supporting patients, people at home. And as mentioned many times already today, is around that virtual contact as opposed to face-to-face contact. And as you'd expect, it is still around the momentum of, you know, avoiding the inappropriate attendances at ED and hospital admissions. So our approach has been, as already mentioned, it is building on the work we've done over the last 6 weeks, and to give a bit of assurance to the board, much of the work that we have undertaken through transformation across all of our teams has built on the work that we already had in place, and it recognises that, well, I think it acknowledges the things that were in our system transformation plan were the right things to be doing, but this has enabled us to bring some of those plans forward. So one of the first things that we've picked up through our planning process is being clear about what our system clinical priorities are, and recognising that we need to do an immediate review of some really key pathways, cancer, stroke and chest pain, for example, but again, to give the board assurances, not that we have any particular concerns around those pathways, but I think it's around the capacity and pace at which we can bring some of the work back online. There are some pathways that are a bit unknown at the moment, and we've got to do some more detailed work, and that is predominantly around the COVID-19 rehab, and there's a number of work streams up and running, looking at that possibility across the STP, locally and within Essex County Council. And helpfully between Christine and I, with trying to get together sort of a senior clinical leadership group that meeting this afternoon to have some sort of strategic oversight of all this work we're trying to do, so we can put it together into some sort of sensible and organised approach. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there is sort of the anticipated demand that we're going to have, particularly around mental health services, and not forgetting that we need to continue to prioritise those high-risk groups. And again, they've already been mentioned. So just briefly in terms of PH's perspective, obviously no surprise, they've already been operating a hospital that's been COVID-19 free and COVID patient pathways, and made some changes in the front door of BD and how they've used their wards. For outpatients, like other organisations, moving very much to non-face-to-face, and they have an ambition of getting all specialties, or 80% of specialties, covered by the end of May, in terms of the outpatients' use of technology and non-face-to-face where appropriate. Also, a key relationship over the last few weeks, particularly with PAH, is about how they've worked with the Rivers in terms of, can you just bear with me just a minute?
No, the birds are very loud. Right?
Sorry about that. It's the joys of being at home. A slight distraction going on. So yeah, some of the key things with PH has been the work they've been doing with the Rivers Hospital. They have had obviously their cancer 2-week waits have been going through the Rivers, but as part of their overarching recovery plan is about maintaining that relationship with Rivers and doing an amount of their elective activity. Have the benefit of being part of their recovery cell, and some of their ambitions around, or some of the recovery in terms of electives, dependent on being able to continue to work with the Rivers for NHS work, is getting activity back up to normal levels between October and November. RTT, they're expecting to get back to normal levels about mid-July, and diagnostics at normal levels over the next 3 weeks. But in terms of the backlog, we've probably not been able to address the backlog until sort of January and February time. And they've got a programme of work in place, which Christine and I are then linked into, in terms of outpatients and how outpatients is brought online. Significant piece that really plays into that is how they're going to be able to have the capacity to do so. Obviously, the requirements around infection prevention control and social distancing is going to have a significant impact on how they can bring some of that work online and over what period of time. So that's in terms of PAH. The key priorities within the community, which we have touched on already through different papers, is the continued use of how we designate our community beds, as mentioned in the paper. But we do need to do that key piece of modelling, so we understand what the demands are going to be, particularly around rehab on our bed-based services, but also our community-based services. And as Jane mentioned in some detail earlier, is that the real importance of our continued support to our care homes, not only around the work of the hub that Jane has mentioned, but also part of our work is how we develop that the sort of the clinical wraparound support that we would want to have in place with the care homes, and some of that is already in place with the enhanced offer from primary care, but we'd like to do a focused piece of work of how we can expand that even further. Other already mentioned is advancing our plans around care coordination, and this has been around helping support managing demand and using the right pathways, but also critically is about the discharge and flow across the wider system. Also, obviously primary care, I don't need to go through the detail on primary care, Peter's already covered that off probably in his Chief Officer's report. But in terms of plans moving forward, each practice and PCN are reviewing their restoration challenges and plans to be in place by the 5th of June. And I think it was mentioned earlier, I don't know if it was one of the comments that came through, was about the importance of accessing advice and guidance from consultants. That is part of the work programme, particularly with outpatients, that we're working with PAH and other trusts to make sure we can rapidly expand that process. So for mental health, we've had a bit of a benefit from mental health over the last 6 or 7 weeks. We've been able to move forward with a couple of our key transformation programmes. One of them was the community mental health crisis service for 24/7, and how that service was accessible via 111. And we were able to put that in place by the 30th of March, and that is, I would anticipate that has been a benefit to our mental health community. Areas we know we need to do more focus on now in our recovery phase is around health checks, both for LD and also our serious mental ill cohort of patients. And like all other providers, the use of technology is to continue in that use. Again, a key part of a piece of work we need to be doing with mental health is trying to anticipate what some of the demand is going to be over the coming weeks and months. Children and young people, I think Jane's mentioned already earlier, is in terms of the prioritising of the high risk groups. You know, as schools come back online, about how we work alongside our education colleagues, and also expected surges around safeguarding. And similarly with children and adolescent mental health, is working on that, or working with those at-risk groups, starting to bring online some of the group work, but again about how we use technology, and again how we're supporting schools and looking at our demand. And at the end of the presentation, if Jane and Peter want to add anything to their areas, then please do. Key bit then to focus on really is around next steps, and that this might link in more with the part 2 item that James will pick up around recovery. As I mentioned already, it is that really critical piece of work is this demand and capacity modelling. And I think Paul Burstow made reference in his presentation is some of the work that NHSI and NHSE have been putting in place through the ICS in starting that demand and capacity working. We're linked into that. We've agreed as a system that we recognise we need to work on that demand and capacity modelling together. So it's not PAH working in isolation on their own capacity plans, because their recovery very much will be dependent on the out of hospital response and vice versa. So we have had an agreement of setting up a task and finish group, which James might want to pick up later. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, is that we do want to manage our response over the next 2 phases in the ICP. We need to maximise our use of our existing estate, and I think we need to make sure that we have a coordinated approach to that. There's a number of conversations that we're having around the same facilities in Saffron Walden, Sydenham House, for example. We need to have a clear plan in place about how we're going to utilise that. Workforce planning and financial planning, James will pick up. We've already set up a weekly local delivery board, or reinstated that delivery board with the operational oversight of recovery for the system. And Andrew and Lance are part of that group. And working with Christine, recognising we need to do a review of our clinical priorities, and also how our expert oversight groups are currently working to have a more strategic overview of our sort of recovery phases as we move forward. EOGs have been up and running, have tried to continue their work over the last 6 weeks. Many of the pathway work programmes have continued. They will have fed into the recovery plans that we have in place. And finally, it's I think I mentioned all that earlier, it's about supporting practice and bringing back services to the new normal. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Tony. Anything?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just about Rob, it's James. I'll come on to it in part two, but I think some of the key messages that are worth noting in part one is I think recovery and restoration serves as a new type of catalyst for One Health and Care Partnership. And I think it's been clear over the last 4, 5, 6 weeks how working in partnership and working together as one system has been so effective in managing COVID. I think there's some key strategic actions that the board will need to take a view on at the next public meeting. Obviously, John's referred to the financial plan for the organisation. We'll obviously need to take a view on the financial plan for the system, particularly in terms of the rest of this year and what the opportunities are into next year. Clearly, we need to determine the future direction of community services. And I think the other thing that Tony alluded to is starting to take a longer term view on data and modelling, and the need in particular to start to triangulate financial, clinical capacity and workforce data into one picture for the whole system. So I think it just gives us a really good opportunity to take stock, push system as the default, and start to sort of integrate our financial approaches, our data approaches and our clinical approaches moving forward. So whilst there's a lot to do, I think it gives us a really timely opportunity to really push some pace into One Health and Care Partnership from this point.
Thanks, James. Yeah, we'll discuss it further in part two. But yeah, David.
Yeah, so in the mortality data that's come out around COVID-19, it would seem that diabetes in particular is a big risk for those who are getting on a bit in life. And I was wondering what the proposed changes might look like as we learn the lessons from this experience going forward.
In specifically for diabetes, or
yeah, I mean, diabetes appears to be one of the risk factors with COVID-19. So if we're going to have a second wave and a third wave, what can we learn from that experience, and what are we going to change in terms of our pathways?
Should I pick that up? Yeah. Okay, so I don't think so. It's important to note all the high risk groups. Absolutely, take your point about diabetes, but it's one of a number. So the background concepts are virtual consultation where that is safe to do so, but recognizing that it's safer to do virtual if there's any risk of infection. It's ensuring that our practices are, have a heightened level of infection protection and control, and adhere to all measures to minimize the possibility that they are the place that COVID can be transmitted. And it's moving to quite quickly now to getting back into the diabetes monitoring program that's been there for years, but ensuring that it's done probably from a risk, taking levels of risk within the diabetes into account. And Angus is working with UCLP on a risk segmentation tool for diabetics, and then ensuring that the monitoring program for diabetics is prioritised according to level of risk. I don't know whether that answers all, but I wouldn't want to split out diabetes separately from the COVID protective way of working, because I think it is, you can't tell who's going to get it, and we need to assume anybody's got it and anybody can catch it type approach, and that's the method we're adopting. And as I say, the routine monitoring of all long-term conditions needs to get going now, and diabetes has come up as a number one.
I think I only mentioned diabetes really because in all of the reports across the part 1 and part 2, it seemed to be less featured than CVD and cancer and stroke.
Okay, that might be partly because it doesn't have secondary and tertiary care elements to the same degree in pathways. Absolutely, it's high up in the primary care end.
And remember,
So just to say that the diabetes EOG has continued to meet over 6 weeks, so it's not sort of fallen away.
yeah, I think it's also probably a reflection of how common diabetes is, and of course, a large number of those cardiovascular patients will also be diabetics as well. I think the other thing there's an opportunity here to put a little bit more investment into patient responsibility and patient self-care where that is practical. So, you know, there'd been getting patients to be more involved in their conditions, particularly in diabetes. So, you know, there's an opportunity here as well, I think. Stephen.
Yeah, I think two separate points. One just following David's point, you know, so diabetes, but the sort of the underlying driver of that is obesity, and it's clearly being signalled from the top that there's going to be a big drive on prevention and supporting people with their weight. And I just wonder to what extent we need to gear ourselves up for that, so we are monitoring that, because rarely do I see any reports on expert oversight groups on how we're helping in population health management on, you know, weight management. And that's a prevention of all the other conditions that we're managing to do. So can we just think about how we might manage that strategically? And then the second thing was we talk about secondary, it may just be semantics, but we talk about secondary care, but I'm thinking also of the logistics of supporting people who are in or will need tertiary care. I'm sort of vaguely conscious of that because in my household is somebody who needs that, and you know, to get their tertiary care, they're going to now need, you know, monitoring and testing before they can avail themselves of that. And clearly, you don't want to travel halfway across the country just to have a swab stuck up your nose. So, how do we, you know, are we thinking about that?
Definitely think. I wouldn't want to be cross-examined on all the detail of the plans, but it's work in progress, and hopefully between Tony and myself we'll get something that looks like a more robust model. But certainly testing for elective care pathways is being established as we speak. London-based cancer work has moved into a clean hub site and has drawn workforce even from our area in to do that. So yeah, the use of tertiary is very much on the agenda and being watched as we go forward.
Just to, sorry, Rob, just to add to what Stephen said and from what Chris said, I think one of the reasons we need to take a longer term view on the information and the modelling is so we can start to be a bit more ambitious around prevention. So we're shifting left a bit away from that focus on frail elderly to looking at what else we can do for working age adults. And if we take, you know, if we take a longer term view, there's an opportunity to model differently along those lines.
Absolutely agree, James. But one of the things that I think will be being looked at over the next few weeks is the potential for the texting platform, for example, and similarly the tool that allows patients to input their own data into their own record. All of that will enhance our ability to deliver some of those messages.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure whether the chats that are coming through are something that go out with the recording, so I'll just repeat them if they are. Apologies. So Duncan is just agreeing with Christine's points about separating out a single risk factor other than age. All efforts need to be good preventative medicine, stroke public health, self-management. And Maggie has come back with happy to help pick up some of these lifestyle risks. So we, as presumably Public Health, Maggie, are in the process of redesign for the lifestyle services for procurement, keen to take on board many lessons from COVID. So, so I think people are sort of assimilating some of the learning that's going to come out of this. So, okay. Any other points, any other comments relating to Tony's presentation? Thanks, Tony. Thanks for the contributions. Ian, you're back with us.
I'm back.
Thank you. Red risk report, and this is for approval.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. There are 4 red risks currently on the register. They've either been rewritten or updated, or in some cases both, obviously in the light of COVID. And basically the board is asked to approve the report and advise also if there are any other mitigating actions that should be taken or other risks that should be noted.
Can't see any hands waving. Oh, apart from one, there you go, David.
Yeah, in the first risk, W260 on page 4, it says the healthcare system is under increasing pressure, even though the peak has passed. And then also in subsequent pages, that's repeated. I'm wondering whether that's quite the right phrasing, whether we are still under increasing pressure if the peak has passed.
Yeah, obviously this is a constantly moving feast, but also I think it depends on which bit you're talking to in terms of increasing pressure, because obviously there's a knock-on effect throughout. But yeah, we'll take that point on board, though, David.
Maybe just leave the peak out of it.
Yeah, well, assuming hopefully it doesn't come back again.
Yeah,
thanks, Ian.
Anybody else with any comments on that? Subject to us just altering that. Yep, we were approving that. Okay. So we have the reports in the papers that people can read. We've referred to a couple of them already. So if there's nothing else, we're on to AOB. So I have an AOB. If nobody else has an AOB, anybody else have a? Okay, so this is just David.
Sorry, Rob, didn't want to steal your thunder just at that moment, but now that Ian's back in the room, and given that this is a public meeting, I note that we've had there's a lot of chat, there's a lot of reporting in the second half of the meeting about the comms process going forward. But given this is a public meeting, I was wondering whether, given the insecurities that the public are feeling, that they still remain rather unconvinced that it's safe to go into a GP surgery or back into a hospital, whether you could give us an update on our current comms position for the public meeting, and to reassure anybody watching that it's safe to go about your normal healthcare process.
In terms of communications, we've been rigidly following, under orders, the national guidance from both Public Health England and NHS England / Improvement. Vanessa's here as well, and as soon as there is a script or key messages come out, then we are adhering to those and cascading them throughout the system. I think moving forward, yes, I mean, in terms of people's confidence, it varies quite tremendously. And one of the pieces of work we are doing, you will remember we've talked about a citizens panel, forming one, and we've got over 100 people of all different age groups and backgrounds as part of that citizens panel. And whilst a considerable number of those are working still at home or confined to home, we're using that as an opportunity to work with them. And we've got a call, I think, to reflect with them about their feelings on their anxieties, whether there's been any behavioural change, such as the drop in numbers going to A&E, for instance. Are there people there that would have gone pre this that now realise there are alternative ways to seek care and advice that they need? And also, it's just been talked about a big move around prevention as well, obviously, because the implications of COVID, and to put it bluntly, the examples that sadly have come out of it, and the impact of people's other health conditions and the relationship between that as well. So, but in terms of general communications, we are as I say, strictly following, as we're required to do so at the moment, the guidance from Public Health England.
Yeah, I think it'd be fair to say that the bottom line is that the NHS never went away. It was always there. And things are opening up. But for the public, if they have concerns, obviously they can look online, they can look on 111, but they can contact their GP surgery. Now, it's not back to normal, because normal was you'd sometimes go down there and sit and wait and all that sort. So that's the new normal is you can still contact, and a triage will be set up where the clinician, the doctor or the nurse, will speak to you, and that can be telephone, may arrange further follow-up with a video consultation, and may get other health professionals involved, such as the community nurses, and may arrange a face-to-face, but that's not the norm, and it's not the first option. So if people have concerns about anything, they mustn't, just hold on to it. It is still, you can seek that advice, but how it is dealt with may be different to before this crisis, in so much as the face-to-face.
We're continuing to push those regular, consistent, standard messages out across social media and through our communication channels, and also working with our partners to push out those messages too, such as those that might be seeking help or care with mental health issues and so forth. So we're continuing to do the normal kind of messaging.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other AOB? Okay, so my AOB is a thank you. It is actually Andrew's last board meeting as a public board meeting as our accountable officer, although thankfully he will still be with us in a managing director role from the 1st of June when Jane starts. Andrew has been incredibly flexible and amenable to all this changes that have been going on, and we have been incredibly lucky. I think we've been incredibly lucky with both of our accountable officers, to be fair, that we've had throughout this CCG, and I think to have Andrew still around moving forward into after the 1st of June is going to be something that's really appreciated. He's made himself welcomed by GPs, even some of our hardened GPs have thanked him. That in itself, I think, is probably a testament, really, to how he's seen. So he is still with us, but in a slightly different capacity. Although Jane has made it clear that that managing director role is, to all intents and purposes, carrying on in what he's been doing, although she retains the accountable officer status. So it's a sort of a midway thank you to Andrew, and just to appreciate what he's doing. I haven't got a little something. There's a breakout.
A breakout. Oh, thank you, Rob. Thank you, Rob.
There you go. Good.
Thank you, Rob. You're very kind.
Okay.
I'm still on full power,
but he is still with us. So there you go. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. So we've come to the end of our public board meeting, so the recording can come to an end.
Questions from the public? Can we just check? We did invite questions from the public. We'll just see if any. There were no questions came in advance.
Nothing came in advance. So thank you once again to Ray, if he's still with us, but not to worry. And we are going to endeavour. We're going to look into the streaming option. So a live streaming option, but for all intents and purposes, it's, we've done that. I thought it went okay. We might have a chat about it in part 2, but I think if we are live streaming in the future, I think we'll be okay. So well done, chaps and chapesses. Okay, so we're stopping recording now. Okay.